It's time to take a look through Wednesday's newspapers now. Joining us, the author Ella Whelan and political leader, writer for the FT, Sebastian Payne. We were just saying during that report, it's all going to go off today, isn't it? The four of them together doing an official walkabout.
It's what the
country treated like pop stars.
It's what the country's waiting for, I think, that the next generation of ours will go out there. And it's amazing how quickly Meghan has just come into the fold on this. I think that it's very much adopted by the national psyche, and I'm sure that will just continue as the wedding approaches.
Yeah, it's happening after 10 o'clock this morning. You can see it live here on Sky News, the four royals out and about together for the first time. Ella, we're going to start the paper review with the front page of The Guardian, and this is about the Labour Party and a dossier on harassment.
Yes, so following the setting up of this website, Labour 2, which was off the back of the Me Too movement, supported by Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, there's been this dossier produced which documents all the submissions to this website, which include very serious allegations of rape and sexual violence, alongside things like inappropriate sexual misconduct, groping, texting, kind of things like that. So it's a whole range of stuff that's been collected and put into this dossier, and lots of the female Labour MPs, but also members of the PRP, are calling on Corbyn to do something serious about this. Now, the issue is that the content of this dossier is so wide-ranging. So it's
at all levels of the party as well.
Yeah, but the problem is it has, in how Corbyn deals with it, is a difficult issue, because he's not just dealing with instances of very serious allegations of rape, he's also dealing with some, let's say, more minor instances of somebody putting a sticker on someone's chest. That was one of the allegations that were put into this, submitted to this website, people saying inappropriate things, which creates a difficulty in how you deal with that, with treating this seriously, because, you know, there is very serious allegations alongside what some people might call trite
allegations. That's the uncomfortable dilemma facing Jeremy Corbyn, Sebastian, is how do you differentiate between something that is serious and something that isn't serious? How do you grade allegations?
Well, I think there's a very clear line here, because one of the things in The Guardian story is that there's no confidence in Labour's disciplinary proceedings at the moment. And if you look at some of the stuff that came out during the Me Too moments at the end of last year, there was all sorts of things about Labour. You know, obviously Bex Bailey, who was a Labour activist who was claimed she was raped, and then there was that whole thing of that not being taken very seriously. I think it's quite clear Labour needs to strengthen up its procedures here, as the Conservatives had to following the tragic incident of suicide of the young activist a couple of years ago. It is obviously difficult. I think you're right, Ella, trying to get that line between, but there are instances where it is very clear where there is sexual harassment. I think there has been a sense that parties just need to be more decisive on this, in Westminster, and politics generally.
They are trying to do something right in the area of LGBT issues. They've appointed Munro Bergdorf, who you may remember was the model who was sacked by L'Oreal for alleged racist comments. Labour have taken her on as an advisor, and they're coming under fire for this, Ella.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent rightly so. She's certainly a very controversial figure, and she's been appointed to advise in relation to LGBT and transgender issues, so it's in her area of interest. But she's, along with the comments about racism, which were controversial previously, she's also more recently...
She said all whites are racist.
Yes, and you know, I think most of us can agree that was a pretty out there statement to make. Whether or not you agree with it.
Which she has since explained and put into context.
And even having explained it, it's still pretty correct. But the more recent things that she's said about all the suffragettes being racist, that she tweeted about the fact that suffragettes hated black people. She tweeted about she's done a Grazia article recently about how women are getting feminism wrong. She's a very kind of outspoken, in not a particularly productive way, person, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit... kind of playing to, I think, the Labour Party playing to what they think is right on to appoint her. And I don't necessarily think she's going to bring anything beneficial to transgender voters or women. She's seeking to speak, certainly, for women.
Well,
at the same time as saying that women don't understand their own
we talk about diversity and embracing all views. She will certainly fuel debate. We'll see what happens there with that. Sebastian, let's go from Labour to the Tories. And the Tory rebels threatening a showdown. This is the front page of the Eye.
Yes, it's all looking quite serious for Theresa May at the moment, because for the first time, her vision of a clean break with the EU, that's leaving the customs union and leaving the single market, is really under threat, because thanks to Mr Corbyn's new stance we heard on Monday, and the Eyes reporting that at least 15 MPs are willing to back behind this cross-party amendment that would force Theresa May's hand. This is very difficult for the Prime Minister because she's been very clear about she sees Brexit as a total break with the bloc, but not all her MPs agree with it. And the result of last year's general election is there's not a majority in Parliament for that vision of Brexit. So I think the Prime Minister speaking on Friday, she's going to again reinforce her vision of Brexit, but she's going to have to try and find a way of convincing those baker's dozen of MPs that you've got to stick with my vision, or if not, it's going to create problems for my authority, the Conservative Party, and potentially bring down the government. So it is a very, very tricky one for the Prime Minister, and she's not really handled these things with much deftness so far.
Ella, you do wonder what she can say on Friday to change the minds of the Tory rebels, because they are steadfast in what they believe, and you do wonder what she can offer them in that speech that would change their minds.
I think a lot of us are worried about what she might potentially offer them. I think since her pretty strong stance on Brexit at the start, or you know, not only after the vote, but at the beginning of after her general election result, she was quite strong on it, and since then she's kind of compromised in order to
reality,
kind of bring
you know,
people into
it's reality
to bring
of
people into the
Brexit.
fold. And you know, the majority of us Brexit voters and Remainers outside of the kind of party political meltdown are thinking, we really hope that she doesn't kind of offer them some kind of compromise, because Brexit is at stake, and that's the big issue.
Others are hoping she does. That's
yeah,
the thing.
and
It's so
saving Brexit
divisive.
and having a Brexit that's sensible and protects jobs, manufacturing in Northern Ireland.
It's a big, important speech for the Prime Minister. It's on Friday. We'll have it live here on Sky News, of course. Sebastian, front page of The Guardian. The Arctic heatwave. That sounds wrong, considering what we're going through at the moment, but it's triggering meltdown fears.
So the only real story I think anyone's going to care
I would say
about
this is a global warning, is it not just UK?
Indeed, obviously, I think everyone waking up this morning will see all of the snow and trying to get out of their driveways. And The Guardian's got a very interesting take on this here that's actually saying that there is a big heat wave going through the Arctic at the moment. Now, this could be a flash, an anomaly, and if you look, they've got a little graph on their front page there that shows how temperatures have been. They're as much as 35 degrees higher in the Arctic, and the effect of that is pushing the winds towards the UK, which is giving us all this snow. And I think the real question to this is this a one-off? You know, we get these freak weather events every so often, or is this a new climate reality we're in? And I think there's obviously some concern that if it is a new climate reality, what's that going to mean for, you know, if we have snow like this every year? The UK's certainly not prepared. A bunch of other countries aren't prepared either. And I think, you know, it is that question about global warming. Are we doing enough? And all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, looking at what's happening in the Arctic and then looking at what's happening outside our windows this morning, Ella, I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's still winter, we should expect this kind of thing, but it's the coldest February and March set to be for many, many years. And this is highly unusual at this time of year, and it is making a lot of people think about climate change.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a difference between thinking about it and looking at whether or not this is just a one-off and then kind of panicking. And I think, unfortunately, we have a tendency to go to the extreme and think global warming is, you know, snow outside our window signals the end of the world as we know it, which I think, as you
Or there's
said,
no global warming, which other people say as well.
a level of kind of discretion in relation to thinking, is this actually a significant trend or is it just a one-off?
Ella, this is an interesting story on the front page of the Daily Mail. This is Max Mosley, who you remember was a key figure in Formula One, then, of course, got caught up in a sex scandal that went to court, and they're asking some very serious questions of him today.
Yes. A kind of big reveal in the Mail that during the previous trial, Max Mosley said that he did not know of the existence of a leaflet. There was this very racist, very abhorrent leaflet that he supposedly published or had his name on it. He said that this didn't exist, that it was nonsense. The Mail has allegedly found this leaflet, and now he is being challenged as to whether or not he lied about the existence of this. And it's just kind of a little bit delicious to watch this happen, to be honest, because Mosley is at the forefront of attacks on the press. He wants censorship of the press. He wants to kind of cover his own back. And here is the evidence of it. This is why, because he's really quite a vile man who wants to cover up his past.
Well, the Daily Mail have taken particular issue with this, Sebastian. They've been investigating this for a long time.
is sort of about 12 pages in the Mail today about this. They're really going for it. And of course, on their front page, they're pointing out that Mr Mosley gave £500,000 the Labour Party, in particular Tom Watson, who's the deputy leader, who takes a great interest in press regulation. As Ella was saying, Mr Mosley has gone to great lengths to put forward his own mechanisms of press regulation, which seem to be mostly concerned with trying to clamp down on a free press. So I think from a journalist perspective, there is something about that. But as with all this thing, you know, there was an interview last night on Channel 4 where with Cathy Newman, where all this was taken, Mr Mosley was taken to task. And, you know, I'd say if anyone has any questions about that, watch that interview and see, is this an honest man who is telling the truth about his past? I'd watch that interview and say, absolutely not.
And if you ever needed a kind of example of why a free press is so crucial.
Totally.
Max Mosley.
There you go. 12 or so pages of it in the Daily Mail today. Ella, Sebastian, thank you for the moment. We're going to take a quick break and we'll have more stories from inside today's papers after that. We're looking through Wednesday's newspapers now with the author Ella Whelan and the Sebastian Payne. Well, actually, he is the Sebastian Payne. I don't know any other. He's also from the Financial Times. We're going to have a look, Sebastian, at the front page of the Times. And you were both listening rather keenly to what Boris Johnson had to say about his leaked memo and then what Liz Truss, the MP, had to say in response.
I think one thing we can both agree with Liz Truss is right on, that Boris going running in this weather is very impressive, considering he's got other things on his mind there. You know, he was obviously trying to add some clarity to the situation about the Irish border question, because we're about to get this big treaty from the EU that's going to land at about midday today, which will clarify what was agreed to back in December. The thing with that is the Irish border question is not really resolved, and there's basically three levels of being resolved. One is the full alignment, which people like Boris don't want. Another one is some kind of technological solution, which we haven't really seen much detail on. Or the third one is something for the UK to come up with. And Boris wrote this letter to the PM, which Sky has seen and we might see online quite soon, that sort of outlines his views on this. And this raised the prospect of a hard border. People are very wound up at the moment. I think the problem for Boris is that, you know, these issues are very sensitive, and the Foreign Secretary has a great turn of phrase. You know, he's a former journalist. He knows how to capture the attention and do that sort of thing. But it's a serious situation with a lot of very worried people. I'm not really sure he's reassuring them.
Well, it was a private memo between the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister. Our political editor, Faisal Islam, has it. He has done a report for us about it. You can see it at 8 o'clock, and we're going to try and get a copy of it online, as well as Boris Johnson asked us to. Ella, let's move away from that story, because we'll be discussing it throughout the morning, and talk about the story inside the Times on page 2 about university strikes.
Yeah, this is about the UCU strikes, which are ongoing. Lecturers and staff members are protesting the fact that their pensions have been put in danger. There could be significant losses of up to £10,000 out of people's pensions for new measures put forward by the university bosses. This has now moved on to the next stage of talks. It's gone to the Conciliation Services, ACAS, and really, I mean, that is good news in one way, because there's lots of discussion about whether the strikes are good or not. I think they're a fantastic thing, and lots of people are showing solidarity with the striking lecturers. The question is what kind of compromise they're going to have to make, or what compromise UCU are going to take, because there's suggestion that they will have to accept a small amount of increased risk in the pension scheme, which I know all of the lecturers on strike will not be happy with.
OK. Sebastian, take me to the story about Donald Trump's son-in-law and his security clearance at the White House. This is in the Times.
Well, we feel like we're coming up to the season finale of this great reality TV show that is the US presidency at the moment, with Jared Kushner, who is the senior advisor to the president, let us not forget, said his security clearance downgraded, which means he won't have access to the top secret information. I think, as someone was joking last night, that might make it a bit more difficult for him to solve the Middle East peace process, which is one of his aims there. But it does just show that it's such a febrile atmosphere, and as the Russia investigation continues, Mr. Kushner's role in that will be highlighted, because, you know, he is someone who's thought to be a person of interest to the investigators, and this does suggest there are questions about, you know, his access to security and his influence on the president. OK,
that's a flavour of what's inside today's papers. A shortened paper review, because obviously we heard from the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, a little earlier. We'll have more stories from inside today's papers in the next hour. Thank you both for the moment. We're going to head up to the roof now, though. The bravest member of our Sunrise team. We're going to take a look through today's newspapers. Here, the author, Ella Ella Whelan, and political leader, writer for the FT, Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to you both. Now, we're going to start, Ella, with the front page of The Telegraph, and one of their lead stories is about a sex scandal at the BBC.
Yes, so a sex scandal of sorts. It's the news that BBC Media Action, which is an international development charity, historically had 6 allegations of sexual misconduct. Some of them were about staff watching pornography on work computers. Some of them were about sexual harassment. And the fact is they failed to declare this at the time to the government, and so now they're in trouble with DFID, and it's part of the ongoing widespread sort of panic about whether or not charities, and certainly charities that give international aid, are regulating themselves properly in relation to sexual conduct. The thing about this is that it's linked to, it's not directly funded by taxpayers in relation to the BBC, but it's linked to the BBC, so it's part of also the criticism of the BBC not handling workplace relations properly. The important thing to say about this is that they were historical cases of allegations. I think 4 of them weren't pursued in terms of disciplinary hearings. They were kind of resolved between the people. It really wasn't anything massively serious, and yet there is a kind of wide panic about it. One commentator saying that this is one of the worst things that she's ever seen, comparing it to what happened in Haiti. So I think this has all gotten a little bit out of control in relation to calling it a sex scandal among the aid industry. I think is pushing it slightly.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Sebastian, because sexual harassment, I mean, it's a serious issue, and you can't belittle anyone's experience. It has various, well, you start getting into grading people's experience, which is a very dangerous territory to get into.
Totally, and I think we've seen this, you know, it's across obviously the aid sector, across politics, across media, across all these industries where essentially they are based on very, you know, clear power structures, and power sort of dictates where you are, what your position, and abuse of power, exactly. And I think, you know, calling things scandals can really ramp up the rhetoric, and you massively lose out on the details of this. So one of the other stories in today's papers is about Labour's hashtag Labour2 campaign to expose us within the party. And again, as we were saying earlier, there is this question of where things sit on those and how you make sure the really serious ones are dealt with swiftly and seriously, and the ones that are not, you know, are the right level of action taken them. So with this BBC case, it is historic. It is 6 people, so it's not, you know, a widespread thing across the corporation, but at the same time, it's clear governance failures.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between comparing watching porn on computers with what happened in Haiti is fairly ridiculous.
Yeah. OK, Sebastian, front page of your newspaper, the Financial Times. What's the lead story there?
So we've got David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, hasn't been spotted in Brussels formally since November.
What?
He's been there with Theresa May when they did that big signing off, but Michel Barnier, who's the EU's chief negotiator, had told foreign ministers, the EU 27, it'd be really good if David Davis could come and have a chat with us, because we need to iron out a few things. And today we're seeing the draft of the withdrawal treaty, which was outlined in December, which is coming out now, and I'm sure there's going to be a few surprises in there from the EU. Some people saying, you know, David Davis has been going around Europe trying to talk to foreign ministers to, you know, get moving on this free trade deal that's going to come after we've left the EU, but the withdrawal agreement isn't quite sorted yet. But obviously Mr Davis has insisted that he talks all the time to Michel Barnier, who came to visit him in London in January. But
well, there's phone, there's Skype, there's FaceTime.
Nothing like a bit of face-to-face action, though, Sarah Jane, as I'm sure you know.
Very true. Ella, take me to the story in the Telegraph about Syrian refugees.
So this is the kind of other side of the aid scandal, the aid industry scandal, about what's been happening out in the field in relation to sexual abuse. And there's this new UN report which alleges that Syrian refugee women were having to, or being forced to, trade sexual services they've described as for aid, for food, for shelter. And obviously we've seen what's happened in Haiti and in Chad, and there is many questions to ask about the conduct of senior members of not only Oxfam but other NGOs and big aid corporations. just approach it with a level of caution is what I think, because what is ultimately coming out of this is calls for more regulation, calls for DBS CRB checks in charity shops. There's a kind of real desire to clamp down on the sector, which actually in many ways does a lot of good.
Well, yeah, charity is all about goodwill, but that goodwill can be abused.
Can be, and I think you can, at the same time as saying you've got to root out corruption, absolutely, and look at really what the aid industry is doing in these countries. But also at the same time, I think the solution is more regulation and more kind of scrutiny of people's workplace conduct, and that is the wrong way to go about it, I think.
Sebastian, Max Mosley was put on mini-trial last night on Channel 4 News with Cathy Newman. He's not going to like what he reads in the newspaper. He's on the front page of the Daily Mail and he's in the Times as well.
No, Nelly, every paper's running with this story, and this all goes back to his trial against the News of the World, and the question being raised is, did he perjure himself? And Channel 4 have uncovered this leaflet from a by-election, which was, frankly, just out-and-out racist, saying that immigrants will, give you diseases, they're taking your jobs, they're going to take your homes and all this kind of stuff. And this leaflet says at the bottom of it, published by Max Mosley. And if anyone's interested in this, they should watch that clip from Channel 4 News, which is doing the rounds on the internet, and it shows how uncomfortable he is. And of course, as well as Mr. Mosley's, sort of controversial reputation, there is the political element that he is a big funder of press regulation, that Impress, which is one of the Leveson approved press regulators, is funded by Mr. Mosley. But Max Mosley also has given £500,000 to Tom Watson, who's deputy leader of the Labour Party. So I think we're going to see questions on should that money be returned. And, he's saying, well, the views yesterday don't represent those views now. But if you look at the stuff in this leaflet, it's really quite abhorrent.
OK, let's move on, shall we, to... how long have we got until we go to the weather? Oh, we've only got a minute, so I'm going to talk about... Actually, I don't know if I want to talk about it, but I'll go for it anyway. Ella, you've chosen this is The Guardian. Sniffy about sweat.
Yes, this is... What a story this is. So, apparently...
Good job it's not smelly vision.
People with a greater tendency to turn their nose up at smells of body odour or urine are more likely to have a right-wing authoritarian attitudes, a study says. A study of only 750 people.
Right, OK.
And I wonder how credible it is.
Let's not sweat too long over this story. I want to go to the pub success, Seb, to take us off with. The Eye, this is.
Yes, obviously we see all these stories about British pubs closing down, one every, dozens every week, but this is a really good and upbeat story in The Eye that 5 years ago this pub was all shuttered up in the middle of, we haven't got it up, so I can't tell you where in the middle of, but one of Britain's great pubs was closed down 5 years ago, and it's now the best in the country.
Fantastic.
So I can't show you, but it's a good pub story if you see the Eye paper day to read about it.
There you go. Support your local pub. And I'm not condoning drinking. A lot of them do food as well. Sebastian, Ella, good to see you this morning. Thank you so much.